Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Apologies for the slight delays. So today is going to be the last share on the Kuzari on Rabbi HaLevi. And last week we looked at, or 2 weeks ago, last week we looked at 2 points or two main planks of Rabbi HaLevi's thought. The first is that he sees he wants to take Judaism out of the realm of a sort of abstract, objective, global, universal philosophy and sees it as specific and personal and intimate. It's about relationship. It's about our relationship as Jewish people with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And from that, he proceeds to his sort of more philosophical proof of Judaism, the famous Kuzari principle or Kuzari proof, in which he thinks that we've encountered Hashem, we've experienced Hashem, we had revelation, and therefore it's not so much that I have an objection to the philosophical proofs, but when you've met someone, you don't need to philosophize about their existence. We've met them, we've encountered them, we had a personal relationship and connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he almost goes out of his way, as we saw, to irritate the king. In other words, whilst the philosopher and the Muslim and the Christian come along with these sweeping global visions, the Kuzari, when he's asked, tell me, the representative of the Jewish people in this staged debate, deliberately says to the king, who is God? God is the God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who took us out of Egypt, who gave us the Torah. To which the king says, well, a parochial, narrow vision. And the answer is yes. Relationship to Hashem is about personal, up-close, intimate connection. And because of that, the Kuzari sees a centrality in the nature of the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, Loshem HaKodesh. This is our language, our country, our people. You can't separate the sort of abstract religious ideals of Judaism from the living people, nation, language, place, culture of actual Jews, who are the people who live and encounter and relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this was the sort of where we left things up to this time. And all I really want to do today is try and go through, if we have time, I'll look at one extra thing, but I really want to look at Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and Loshem Yisrael in the thoughts of the Kuzari, the status of the Hebrew language, the Jewish people, and Eretz Yisrael. And for all of them, really, the Kuzari is going to say the same thing, which is, this is essential to spirituality. This isn't just a coincidence that the Jewish people, like any other people, have to have a language, have to have a country, have to have a government, have to have a place to live. That isn't the case. This is sort of integral to our spiritual mission. The formative molding blocks of what it means to be a nation, in the case of the Jews, are the features of holiness which allow us to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't say, I want to relate to Hashem, because I believe in the sort of truths, objective truths of the Torah, but I don't choose to join the Jewish people. If you want to have that relationship to Hashem, then you have to join the Jewish people. That's what it means to connect to Hashem. It was a personal experience of a particular nation in a particular point in time who encountered God in a particular way, and that's what creates our ability to relate and connect to Hashem. And none of the features of that are coincidental. That's the Kuzari's view, which means to say that, and he says this explicitly, that it's not coincidence that it's an Avraham Avinu who speaks Hebrew, who belongs to a particular branch of the Semitic family, who lives in a particular region of the world, who is the one who is able to form that unique relationship to Hashem and form that sort of close bonds and covenant, out of which emerges the Jewish people. It obviously needs Avram to decide to actualize this. He's a free-willed human being like anyone else, but he's a privileged human being in that he's born at the right time and place and capabilities and makeup to be able to achieve what he achieves. So I've mentioned before, in a sort of more Maimonidean worldview, you could imagine a figure emerging in Central America, in the Aztec or Inca pagan empire, who arrived at monotheistic belief, and they would have been Avraham Avinu of the world. And that from there, the covenantal people could have and would have emerged. Where then would have been the Holy Land? Hashem would have picked a part, a region of that world which carried, the Rambam sees Eretz Israel as equipped uniquely to allow us to fulfill our divine mission. But that's because it has a location that's central and it has geographical features, the Torah itself says, in which we don't have a constant water supply like they have in the Nile in Egypt, but we're dependent on rainfall. But in principle, another location could have been molded into a suitable home for the Jewish mission, and another language could have been molded into a suitable vehicle for Kedusha, and the world could have looked very differently. In other words, everyone agrees Lashon HaKodesh is a unique language able to carry concepts of Kedusha and sanctity within it, but that's because perhaps Hashem molded it into a language that has the capacity to carry these ideas through the vehicle of Nevuah and prophecy. Again, let me just use an analogy from the secular realm. If you're alive in the 1500s, English, as spoken at the time, isn't really a language in which you can discuss sophisticated philosophical ideas or scientific ideas. If you want to do that, you need to speak in Greek or Latin. Maybe then French evolves into such a language, but English doesn't have the capacity to do it. Fast forward to the 21st century, English is perhaps the only language that has the capacity to carry within it the full range of technology and science and philosophy and so on, because it's developed into that language and it's been given the resources to do so. You simply couldn't speak about certain scientific and philosophical ideas of at least in the West, in a language far from Western tradition, in Swahili or something like that. It just doesn't carry within it the vocabulary and the resources to contain ideas that have emerged out of 1,000 years of Western tradition. So Lashon HaKodesh is a language that carries within it the resources to speak about the spiritual ideas that the Torah is interested in. But had history been very different, we can but imagine what an Avraham Avinu emerging in Central America, where history could have gone in that case. So that's a sort of Maimonidean perspective. But the Kuzari Chacham, when he represents himself to the Khazar king, very much does not think like that. That's not the model he's giving. And again, in this context, the Kuzari has largely run the argument. I mentioned right at the beginning of the series that I think one of the reasons the Kuzari has become less learned is because it's almost become standard Judaism. That's the platform from which everything starts. So when we are brought up, that's the Judaism we are taught. He's so convincingly represented in his essays, in his Maimorim of the Chacham, either representing and reflecting what was consensus thought or molding consensus thought, so successfully that's become the norm. And when you say a Rambam view, that's the sort of interesting share, that's the innovative perspective, the one that we haven't heard, the sort of original way of looking at things so much of the time. But the Kuzari has become the norm. So the Kuzari is presenting what's really become, I think, the norm, which is, no, Lashon HaKodesh, says the Kuzari, is the unique language created by God, not just evolved by humans as a way of communicating, which carries in it the resources to express Kedusha and sanctity, because this is the language of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Kuzari says an Avraham Avinu could only emerge in a world in which Lashon HaKodesh was one of the Semitic tongues floating around. And we will see later, Avraham Avinu could only emerge as a descendant of Shem and Ever from a particular tradition and legacy or genealogy of Kedusha, of sanctity, from a unique group of humans who carried still within them the divine spark to the highest degree, the divine mission to the highest degree. It's not coincidence. Avraham couldn't have emerged anywhere else. It wasn't just, Avraham clearly was a formidable individual who, with exceptional intellectual power and spiritual power, emerged at the connection and monotheism and relationship to Hashem, but only an Avraham with the whole backgrounds and setting and context and family and geography that he had could have achieved this. No one else could have done this. There isn't the possibility of an Avraham Avinu emerging in Central America or somewhere else. You need to be in Eretz Yisrael, in speaking Lashon HaKodesh, a member of the family of Shem ve'Eva, if you wish to be able to carry this. So in a few moments, we'll look at Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael and explore this further. But for now, let's just think about Lashon HaKodesh. So the Kuzari sees Lashon HaKodesh as a unique language. Someone who spoke Inca or Aztec or Latin or Greek or English could never have communicated in the same way, with the same success, the same depth of connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It simply wouldn't have been viable. Is Hebrew superior to other languages? Asks the Chazar king. Answers the Kuzari, yes, absolutely. Why do we find that Hebrew seems deficient to other languages? We find that you can express ideas in Arabic that you can't express in Hebrew. Philosophy is being written by this point in Arabic. Poetry of indescribable beauty is being expressed in Arabic. Says the Kuzari, because we went into Golus and we lost a lot of our Hebrew, but fundamentally Hebrew has within it all the qualities it needs to communicate everything of value to human beings. What is Hebrew? Where does it come from? It's the language that Adam and Chava spoke. It's the language that they named the animals in, and it's the language that Avraham Avinu spoke. And it's the most perfect of all languages. It's divine speech. Sounds very normal. This is the basic picture of things. But as I said, the Rambam looks at things very very differently. The Kuzari then expands on this, and he basically traces the rise and fall of Lashon HaKodesh as being in line with the rise and fall of a holistic lived Judaism. So he says, till Avraham Avinu came along, Lashon HaKodesh wasn't an integrated language. You didn't have people who were speaking Lashon HaKodesh both as their mother tongue and as a language of Kedusha. In fact, we know what the mother tongue of this was. It was Aramaic, right? We see that in the encounter between Yaakov and Lavan, Yagar Sadus. So they're speaking Aramaic the whole. Maybe there's rare individuals who are speaking Lashon HaKodesh for purposes of Kedusha. The yeshivas of Shem Eva. We don't know what the yeshivas were, these academies of Shem Eva, but these were spiritual retreats. Yeshiva literally means sitting, a place where people sat, people retreated and engaged in spiritual contemplation. And maybe there they spoke Lashon HaKodesh, but it wasn't an integrated language. Avraham begins speaking Lashon HaKodesh. There's the rise and fall of Lashon HaKodesh. In the first Beis Hamikdash, Lashon HaKodesh is spoken by everyone. That's the national language. They go into exile, they come back. Aramaic has become more of a national language, but Lashon HaKodesh is still spoken by the elite at least. You have Mishnayos written in Lashon HaKodesh. By the time you enter the Talmud Bavli, Aramaic has become even the spoken language of the Talmidei Chachamim, and Lashon HaKodesh is really declined and not to be restored. We go into Golus and we end up speaking all sorts of other languages, but not Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Kuzari, we're missing something in that case because we're not able to function. That's part of Golus. We're not able to function holistically in a sort of healthy way, because a people needs a language and a country, which we'll come on to later. And if we don't have that, we don't have a fully integrated Judaism. We don't have a Judaism in which we're able to think and speak and communicate and buy stuff in the shops in a Kedusha way, because we're not speaking Lashon HaKodesh. Yes.
What was then the language of the world before we go on? And second,
yes.
And secondly, in Israel, but we kept them. So that was a special.
So post Noach, you have the 70 descendants of Noach, and that form the Shimon Mamos, and then you develop the scattering of languages. In Mitzrayim, I'm not sure if the Kuzari references this explicitly or not, I can't remember. But if you understand that to mean they kept Lashon HaKodesh, but Avraham introduces Lashon HaKodesh in a holistic way. He's the first person who takes Lashon HaKodesh out of the academies of Shem Eva and makes it a lived, holistic language. And ever since then, to some degree, we've had Lashon HaKodesh not just as the language of the yeshiva and the Beis Medrash, but as a spoken language. But then we lost it. We went into Golus and it retreated once again to the elites, and then even away from that. So we're not able to live a whole holistic Judaism. Yes.
What would we say to?
Yes. So you can see why Rabbi HaLevi is such an exciting expression, a resource and a framework for Rav Kook to operate in, who we dealt with in our previous series, who sees in Eliezer ben Yehuda's revival of Ivrit as something positive. He's aware of the challenge again. Rav Kook is not naive. He sees the whole dangers of secular Zionism and everything. But yeah, he sees this as Lashon HaKodesh on some level or other. not in the fullest form, but on some level are they coming back? And this is part of why the religious Zionist Dati world in Israel has embraced Kuzari again in a massive way, because he's speaking about Lashon HaKodesh as the need for it to be a spoken language, and Eretz Yisrael. We're not just missing some side feature. We're basically in Kuzari living a Jewish life. We've got a wonderful life here in Hendon, and it's a fantastic Jewish life. So it's a pity that we're not in Eretz Yisrael. There's a mitzvah we're missing, and it's a pity that we can't speak Lashon HaKodesh. No, this is the framework within which and what it means to be the holy people, the Am Kodesh, who can carry within us our divine mission. This isn't just a sort of side detail of Klal Yisrael. And part of Golus is not just that we left Eretz Yisrael, but that we also lost Lashon HaKodesh. Yeah.
Not so much.
I think he has been successful in this argument. I think that, again, I don't want to go too long now back into the topic of religious Zionism, but even the opponents of religious Zionism buy into the idea that Jews should be a nation with a country, with a government, speaking Lashon HaKodesh. And they're simply skeptical about our ability to build that in modernity, without Moshiach or in breach of the three Shavuos, or however you explain that philosophy. But no one really anymore in a living tradition of Yiddishkeit is arguing that that's what Klal Yisrael is meant to be. The Chasam Sofer, for example, expresses hesitancy. He's before Zionism, but he speaks about this, and it was adopted by Hungarian follows. He thinks that the sort of attempt to rebuild Lashon HaKodesh as a living language is the worst thing, because you're taking Lashon HaKodesh and we don't know how to rebuild it. So you're Europeanizing it. How do you say it? Europeanizing. Okay, you're Europeanizing it. You're taking it into a language that has in many ways been debased from its kedusha. So the debate is how you actualize Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi's vision, but he is certainly a very, very powerful voice. And let me remind you again of his biography. He himself moves to Eretz Yisrael. We don't know exactly to what degree he makes it and how long he spends there. And also, he attempts to revitalize Lashon HaKodesh. Remember now what we started with at the beginning of his career. He's a poet. And there's a reason he sees it as a Chilul Hashem, that poetry can't be written in Lashon HaKodesh to the standards of Arab poets. And he writes poetry which matches the best of the Arabic language poets. The Kuzari himself, Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, is living in newly conquered Christian territory in Spain, but is still very, very influenced by the whole sort of golden age of Islam, Christian, Jewish living together, and Arabic is still very much the spoken language. He writes poetry. We also mentioned the puzzle, which perhaps Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi did teshuva for later in life, we don't know, in which he even writes secular poetry in Lashon HaKodesh. So we know him, what's been preserved for posterity, his exceptionally beautiful piyutim and his kinnos, the depth of his longing for Eretz Yisrael and his Tzion series and other things. But he also writes secular poetry in Lashon HaKodesh. Now, why is he writing secular poetry in Lashon HaKodesh? So one answer could be because he's also a human being. He's interested in secular ideas and he enjoys poetry. It may be he later in life sees this as a failing, or it may be that he thinks that's important. This is his integrated vision of Lashon HaKodesh being able to be a holistic language that can also deal with other matters. He may see it as a Chilul Hashem, that Lashon HaKodesh can't write such poetry, and therefore he's writing his piyutim. What I want, again, in this series, I called it not just philosophy. We're not learning Kuzari in this series, even though we're spending a lot of time on Kuzari. We're learning Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. We're trying to understand his life and his thoughts. And I'm trying to share with you a holistic picture. It's the same Yehuda HaLevi who writes his beautiful Hebrew poetry, who moves to Eretz Yisrael, and who writes this outstanding quasi-philosophical work of the Kuzari. Yeah. Yes. 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 Again, I don't want to get into modern day Zionism. It's sort of a little off topic. Other than say, I agree with you. One of the very beautiful phenomena we're seeing in Israel is that the fears in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, 1940s, 50s, 60s, that Israel would be this terrible force for secularization And there was that aspect of the dream, be a nation like all other nations and on, has Baruch Hashem not proven to be the case. And there's an emergent, very, very Jewish culture, even amongst those who self-define as secular, very, very deeply embedded emunah, engagement with the cycle of the Jewish year, a renewed interest in Tanakh that was already in the 30s and 40s, but even a renewed interest in Gemara and Medrash. So yeah, Baruch Hashem, 100%. I'm not here trying to descend into the debate of who got it right and who got it wrong in the relationship to Zionism. You could argue that the opponents of Zionism also essential in this, and avoiding Israel going too far to the other way. I don't want to go into that. I'm simply acknowledging that Rabbi HaLevi was taken by Rav Kook and his Talmidim as a very prime voice, and to this day it remains a very central element of much of Dati Lumi thinking, for better and for worse. And we'll come on to some of the more difficult consequences of this view in a few moments. I just want to mention one other point about the Hebrew language, and then I want to go on from this. I am very, very far from understanding poetry. I'm a very unrhythmic person, unfortunately, and don't really hear beats and the like, and was not built that way. But the Kuzari says that he says when we compare, very interesting point for those who are interested in these things. He says there's two sorts of poetry, two ways that we can use language. One way is tunes that are meant to be aesthetically beautiful, art that's meant to enlighten, offer aesthetic experiences and so on. And in that, he says that the very formulaic Arabic poetry that developed, in which every word rhymes and you had exactly the same meteor and exactly the same rhythm. I mean, the Arabic poets and the Jewish Spanish poets who copied their styles had exceptionally strict rules of poetry in which there had to be the same number of syllables in every verse and so on. That's if you want art for art's sake, as entertainment, as aesthetics, as artistic enlightenment. But the second reason for poetry is to inspire, to act upon the soul. Kumzitz, he says it's public recitation. And he says that's what David HaMelech is trying to do in Tehillim. And therefore he says it's enough in Tehillim that Hodu Lashem Ki Tov can be sung to the same tune as Lois Niflois Gedolos Levadoi, Kilolom Chastoi. As long as you can sing Hallel, that achieves what David wanted to achieve. When we sing Hallel, Hodu Lashem Ki Tov, Kilolom Chastoi, etc., it works perfectly well as a song. You don't need anything else in it. And therefore that's why Jewish poetry developed that way, because it was designed for public singing that we to this day, when you're singing Hallel in a shul packed with people, all singing together, it's a very beautiful, stirring spiritual occasion. It's not high art. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be high art. That's not what Lashon HaKodesh is aimed to achieve. So he says that anything can be done in Lashon HaKodesh, but when I claim it's the best language, I'm not claiming it's the best language for any sorts of aims. I'm claiming it's the best language for what we need to do, which is Jewish spiritual interests. Okay, so that's the Kuzari about Lashon HaKodesh. Now let's talk about Am Yisrael, and this is where the aspects of the Kuzari's thoughts have ended up the most controversial and have fed into arguably some of the less pleasant sides of some of the extreme wings of some of the things going on in the Dati Lumi world. And I don't want to too much talk about current affairs. Why talk about current affairs if we can talk about the past? But it is a raging debate, a live debate. We had here in this shul Micha Goodman speaking, and he's been very involved in this discussion, wrote a book on the Kuzari famously, which I don't agree with, but I mention it simply because people are aware of this discussion. So the Kuzari says that not only is Lashon HaKodesh uniquely suitable for Ruchnius, not only is Eretz Yisrael uniquely qualified for spirituality, but Klal Yisrael are uniquely qualified for spirituality. We are the people who are able to carry relationship with Hashem in the fullest way possible. And he says to the Chazar king, the Chacham says to the Chazar king, we are the people that encountered Hashem. So we don't need all this philosophizing. We met God. So the Chazar king says to him, does that mean that your belief is confined only to you as Jews? And the Kuzari says, yes and no. I mean, anyone is welcome to join us. Anyone can become part of Klal Yisrael. But the truth is, in terms of our mission to the world, we don't engage in missionizing because we kind of recognize that this is a unique family experience. And if you aren't part of that experience, you're not going to naturally be drawn to it in the same way as we are. we experienced HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives. An outsider, a stranger, Nochri didn't. So we have advantage number one in that this is our family history. When we're talking about Kadosh Baruch Hu, we're talking about Kaviyachal, a friend, someone we met. He's part of he was our great grandparents' friends. He was part of our Jewish experiences. So that's number one. But secondly, he says, we are the Am HaNivcha, B'chei HaAdam. We are the pick, the choicest of peoples. And we are, he really says there's 3 points. We directly experienced revelation, so we are the ones that encountered Hashem. We are commanded in mitzvahs as a result, which the rest of the world are not. But we are also the human beings who are uniquely equipped to be able to do this. And he sort of traces the development of humanity. And he says there was Adam, and that the choicest aspect of Adam's spiritual potential went via shame, went via the lineage that led to Noach, and then from the lineage of Noach led to shame, and in shame to the family of Aver, and ultimately Avraham Avinu. So Avraham Avinu was an exceptional individual because of 3 or 4 factors. And in a way, what he's saying is obvious. He says every person's ability is made up by their qualities as a person. Maybe nowadays we'd call that genetics or heredity. Then it's made up by the education and raising and environment and education and raising, in other words, the experiences that people have. And then it's made up of the environment within which you live, the culture, the society, the world, the natural surroundings. And Avraham Avinu is fortunate in all 3. He has the heredity of Shem and Aver. He has the education and self-development of... thank you very much. Thank you. He has the education and self-development of his own unique abilities, and he has the environment of living in Eretz Yisrael, which is uniquely equipped to allow him to achieve what he does. What's special about Eretz Yisrael? It's geography, it's the interface of the civilizations, and it's physical resources, its environment, its climate. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. Humans do well by living in a zone in which they're not completely comfortable, but that isn't such a struggle to survive that you can't function. If you live in a desert, you don't have time and leisure and a possibility of building a civilization. If you live in a completely comfortable environment, you don't have a spur to growth. But living in that sort of mix, this is part of what's unique about Eretz Yisrael. So it's a perfect environment. And it's also uniquely equipped in resources, spiritual resources. Again, we're jumping ahead of ourselves a bit because we spoke about Lashon HaKodesh, now we're talking about Am Yisrael, we'll get to Eretz Yisrael later. But he says, just like there's nothing wrong with me saying some countries have better resources for mining of minerals, and other countries have better resources for natural harbors and for naval affairs. You're not going to be a great naval state if you're a landlocked country, if you're Austria or Switzerland. If you're an island nation, you can develop naval resources. So similarly, Eretz Yisrael is uniquely equipped in a spiritual realm for spiritual resources. So Avraham Avinu is uniquely equipped to become the founder of the nation that can connect to Hashem. So then he carries on the tracing of history. So we've been from Adam to Noach to Shem to Aver to Avraham. Avraham himself has some children who are discarded. Yishmael, Esau. Eventually we get to Yaakov, the Shvatim. Now we have for the first time a mass of people that eventually grows into a nation, all who carry within them this unique spiritual potential. Okay, so just to summarize what we've said so far, the Kuzari is arguing that Avraham Avinu is a phenomenal individual. He's made amazing heart efforts to achieve godliness, but he could only do that because he was also born into the right family, living in the right environment and operating in the right place. He could do that because he was the descendant of Shem and Aver. Let me throw in here now even the genetic descendant of Shem and Aver, and you can see where this can become problematic. He's the found in Eretz Yisrael, speaking Lashon HaKodesh, has access to the right spiritual resources, and therefore can become what he becomes. And out of him emerges a nation who all possess these unique qualities. The Kuzari gives the analogy of a seed, a shell, and a fruit. The seed is Klal Yisrael. The shell are those who protect that seed, but don't have the potential to grow into anything more. And the fruit is those of Klal Yisrael who actualize themselves and produce fruit. Not everyone actualizes themselves. Being a member of Klal Yisrael doesn't mean that you will become a spiritual person with a connection to Hashem, but it means you have the potential to become that. You can become a Moshe, an Avraham. You can actualize yourself in that way. In a sense, a definition of Klal Yisrael is a potential Novi, says the Kuzari. If you're a member of Klal Yisrael, you have the potential to become a prophet, to get Ruach HaKodesh. Not everyone does. Not all of us have the ability or the time and the wherewithal, but spiritually you are equipped. That's what it means to be part of Klal Yisrael, that you're spiritually equipped to become that. And then he says, this is almost analogous to the classic medieval philosophical formulation in which you divide creation into domain, minerals, stones, which are completely passive. Then you have tzemeach, that which grows, which is plant life. Then you have chai, which is living animals, creatures. Then you have medaber, which is human beings. And then you have Yisrael, a unique group of human beings who are equipped with a heightened spiritual potentiality. Okay, I'll pause there for a few moments and then we'll go on. Yes.
How does that sit with Avram Avinu, as it were, rebelling? Because having faith in his father, so he wasn't brought up. Yes, he had all the title inside through the virus, but it would seem that he is living in a life of terror and he's actually rebelling against the status quo.
Okay, so the Kuzari is not claiming Avram has it easy. He's not claiming that just because you're from the family of Shem and Eva, you're automatically a good person. He recognizes Avram is extraordinary in his rebellion against Nimrod and Terach and the environment around. But he also says Avram is uniquely equipped to do so. Not everyone could have done what an Avram did. He even goes further than that, and he speaks about Terach. And he says sometimes genetics skips a generation. You can have a grandchild who looks much more similar to their grandparents than the child does. So he says, okay, Terach carried within himself the potential for of Shem and Ave's legacy. Terach didn't actualize it, and it skipped a generation, and Avram ends up like a throwback to great-great-grandfather Aver and great-great-great-great-grandfather Shem. He's part of that sort of tradition. Okay, so this is, yes. The Kuzari very much addresses universal morality. He's speaking here to the Khazar king, and he's aware that what he's saying is problematic. The Khazar king actually turns to him and says, again, let's remember the conversation. The Khazar king speaks to the Christian, the Muslim, and the philosopher. Then he turns to the Jew. The Chacham says to him, "We are the people who are descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We left Egypt." Khazar king said, "Now you've ruined it. You've shown how I thought even about not inviting Jews coming to the debate." Okay, the Chacham responds, and he then says, "Now that you've accepted we have this personal relationship, I'll give you a more sweeping vision." And the Chazar king says, "Okay, I'll carry on talking to you." And then he goes back to explaining how we are the Bechir, we are the humans who are imbued with spiritual qualities, and we are the ones that experienced revelation. And the king says to him, "Jew, here you go again, back to your narrow parochial nonsense. After having been so pleasant, now you're again winding me up and irritating me." So that, again, this is a staged conversation. Rabbi HaLevi is the author as much of the king as he is of the Chacham. The Kuzari is aware that what he's saying is going to be upsetting to the king, but he's saying the truth. He's saying it as he sees the truth, which is, you're welcome to join us if you wish to become a ger, but if you don't wish to do so, you're not going to have that same relationship with Hashem. It's simply not viable. Yeah. All humans are expected to be medaber, to speak. That means to use reason, to be moral, and so on. But if you want a relationship with Hashem, then join Klal Yisrael. Shem mitzvah nenach are just basic morality, basic decency. If you want a relationship with Hashem, that's by joining Klal Yisrael. Yeah.
He's saying that it's not just choosing, this is also a relationship. It's different to God that chose the Jewish people as a nation. So he's saying that being different in terms of saying it's not only different, but in order to have a true relationship, you have to be Jewish. Is that the point?
Yes, I've long, for a long time, I've longed to share with you a bit of Victorian graffiti. I've never had the excuse to do so in a share, so I'll take this opportunity. This is absolutely true. In early Victorian era, the Christian world was beginning to think about Christianity in a sort of broader way. They're quite fascinated by Jews. There was a lot of interest in Hebraizing, and so on. Many universities founded Jewish studies. A piece of graffiti appeared on a wall in Victorian England. A very famous line: "How odd of God to choose the Jews." And the response that was graffitied back underneath it was, "Not so odd. The Jews chose God." So, on the one hand, the Jews chose God. Avram is chosen because he chooses God. On the other hand, in the Kuzari's thought, there couldn't have been an Avram in Central America. He's uniquely equipped with the potential to choose God. Not everyone can enter into that depth of relationship with Hashem. Okay, so is this racist so far? So far not. And what I've said so far is as I said, the Kuzari in many ways has won the argument. And the idea that Klal Yisrael is equipped with unique spiritual potential and so on is some might like it, some might not like it, some might agree, some might disagree. But anyone is welcome to join. So we're not claiming exclusivity. Anyone is welcome to join and become part of that relationship. And in that sense, the Kuzari is saying what I think in many ways has become the classic approach, which is when Judaism is not a philosophical system in an abstract sense. It's got a philosophy behind it, but it's not claiming to be universalistic. The Kuzari is right. This is about unique Jewish experiences, Jewish history, and the like. And anyone's welcome to become part of that. The Gemara says a ger can say, "Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov." He can talk about Elokei. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to my ancestors. The gods of my fathers, because you become part of Klal Yisrael, and therefore Avram is Av Hamoin Goyim. He's the father of a multitude of nations. So anyone can choose to join, but if you want that depth of relationship, that means being part of Klal Yisrael. Are we particularist or globalist or universalist in our outlook? The answer is we think both. We are particularist in that we see ourselves as having a unique mission and responsibility, and that is a national story. We are a nation. But we care about the whole world's relationship and connection to Hashem, as embodied indeed by the Chacham speaking to the king. However, the Kuzari then goes further, and this is where it gets controversial. And the Kuzari says that someone who joins Klal Yisrael can become part of the covenantal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They can become a mitzvah in mitzvahs, commanded in mitzvahs. However, the potential to prophecy is not something that they can achieve. Why not? Because they are not from Shem and Eva, they are not descendants of Avram. And this has created, particularly in recent years, a storm. I'm simply sharing with you what he says. On the one hand, this sounds profoundly problematic because he is saying, in a sense, that there's a family hereditary quality. Anyone is welcome to join Klal Yisrael, but the unique human capacity to achieve Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah, that's something which is unique to the descendants of Shem and Eva and Avram Avinu. On the other hand, in some respects, we live with this anyway. We're not bothered by the idea that if you're descendants of Aaron HaKohen, you can serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and only someone from a particular family amongst Klal Yisrael can have the unique experience of being able to go Lifnai v'Lifnim, the Kodesh Kedoshim, and so on. For most people, it makes no difference anyway. Most Kohanim are never going to go Lifnai v'Lifnim and do the Avodah of Yom Kippur, because most won't become Kohanim Gedolim. We live with that and handle that. Similarly, most members of Klal Yisrael never actualize themselves and become Nevi'im. However, only someone who is from Shem and Eva, from Avram Avinu, can become, has the potential to actualize themselves as a Novi. Yeah. Maybe pre-Matan Torah, there's the possibility of a Novi, but once it's selected, Bilam may be miraculous, maybe a one-off exception. We find Noach, we find Avram, we do find Nevi'im who exist pre-Matan Torah, but these are unique and rare individuals. If Bilam is Lovon, then he himself is a descendant of Shem and Eva and also has that spiritual capacity. So there's ways of dealing with this, but Nevuah is at least post the selection of Avram Avinu, a unique property of the descendants of Avram. Again, I'm not here calling on anyone to like or dislike this. I'm simply sharing the thoughts of Rabbi HaLevi. Rabbi HaLevi takes very far the idea that this is a personal family experience. Lashon HaKodesh, Eretz Yisrael, to become an Avram, to become a Novi, you need a unique combination of the right intrinsic qualities, the environment, the self-actualization, the education, and only when you have all of them meeting can one become a Novi. Incidentally, again, at this point, one may be worrying about the fairness and unfairness of this. But anyway, a Novi, to be a Novi, do we live in a fair world? Does everyone have the intellectual capacity to become a prophet? A prophet has to be a Chacham, an Oshir, a Gibber. Why does a prophet have to be wealthy and strong? Because they need physical health to achieve what they're meant to achieve. They need material resources, so they're not at the mercy of others. You need a certain intellectual capacity to do this. Do we live in a fair world anyway? And the Kuzari speaks about this. Again, he's not unaware of the problems in what he's saying. He's choosing to have the king attack him and question these problems. And the Chacham thinks he has an answer to this. The king says, how can this be fair? Why should there be humans like this and like that? And the Kuzari says, he answers the question with a question. You think we live in a fair, it's very Jewish, you think we live in a fair world? Do you think, did you anyway have an illusion that everyone is equal and everyone has the same capacities and the same potentials? All I'm saying is that there's a certain sort of spiritual potential. I may not have the capacity or the spiritual or the potential to become a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. I may simply not have the minds for it. Is that unfair? You have a range of humans with a range of abilities and a range of living creatures, for that matter, also. Is it unfair that a cow is a cow and can give milk but can't lay eggs? Is it unfair that a cow is a cow and can't contemplate Bach in music or learn Gemara? Each part of creation has its capacities and its abilities and so on. And anyway, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are all born with certain qualities and certain abilities, and I may simply not have the genes that ever allow me to become an Olympic level weightlifter or a sprinter or a great musician or a great scientist. And similarly, a great prophet, the ability to become a great prophet is part of a particular national characteristic and quality of human, which isn't possessed by everyone. It doesn't mean that everyone doesn't have the ability to relate to Hashem, to grow spiritually, to maximize their potential, get over the fact that you don't live in a fair world in the sense, if you're looking for fairness in the sense of everyone being identical and everyone having identical abilities, that simply isn't the world we live in. And whether you like my philosophy or not, says the Kuzari, the Chacham to the king, that's just the world we live in. That's anyway, you've got a problem. That is the world we live in, that people have different abilities and different opportunities. Sorry, no. Okay. There's been a lot of talk, I don't want to go into this in too much, but there's been a lot of talk about this in Eretz Yisrael in recent years. I don't agree with his book, but Michael Goodman writes a book in which he argues that the Chacham isn't representing Rabbi HaLevi's true views. I don't think that's a fair reading of the book, but have a look at that if you like. There's been a lot of discussion around parts of the Dati Nomi world that end up with rhetoric that can sometimes sound, I'm talking about the extreme wings of it, but can sometimes sound supremacist, can sometimes sound racist and so on. There's been a lot of talk around whether the Kuzari has been a bad influence on that school of thought or not, whether they're taking his ideas too far or distorting them. The Kuzari speaks, by the way, again, I don't want anyone to leave this thinking he's not a sophisticated thinker. He's aware of, the concept of racism is not a modern concern. He's aware of this. He speaks explicitly, by the way, about black and white and equality and so on. He addresses this. He says that, first of all, we don't live in an equal world. All humans have to come to terms with the fact that they have different abilities, and we're never going to, not everyone is imbued with the qualities of becoming an entrepreneur and becoming enormously wealthy. People have different abilities and different qualities. He also says, don't read into what I'm saying that you have rights and privileges. I'm saying you have responsibilities and duties in this. He says, nowhere in what I'm saying is this meant to be a hierarchy that gives you the superior, the ability to abuse the inferior in my sort of hierarchy of spiritual potential. On the contrary, this is about responsibility and duty and obligation. Nonetheless, this is what he says. This is his view that he outlines, and the king challenges on this. The Kuzari is not. He's not giving himself an easy time. The Chacham is asked explicitly by the king an equivalent of, surely this is racist, surely this is unequal, surely this is supremacist, and he responds in the manner that I've just described. Yeah.
The idea of superiority of the spiritual potential.
Yes.
Is that not part of the mainstream? Not including Israel, not about, but mainstream views throughout the centuries, and perhaps the more recent centuries.
So two points. The Kuzari in many ways has become the mainstream view in so many things. I think the idea of the Kuzari that to connect HaKadosh Baruch on the highest level, you have to be a member of Am Yisrael, has become the mainstream view. And unlike the Rambam, who perhaps says that we're individuals, the Rambam sees mitzvahs, Torah, Klal Yisrael as a system that can develop everyone into this maximum capacity and create a structure for everyone to do this. But he says there are rare individuals, the great philosophers, who can achieve remarkable closeness to Hashem without the external framework, because he thinks there's no such thing. If you want to connect to HaKadosh, become a member of Am Yisrael. That aspect, I think, is very well known. The second stage, in which he says even those who join Klal Yisrael join to a degree, but don't have the highest level of capacity open to them, is less well known, though in truth, in some ways, if we think about it, it's anyway implicit. A ger can't become a kohen, and nor can most members of Klal Yisrael become kohenim. We live with the fact that only descendants of Aaron can be kohenim, and we don't see that as racist in any way. The Kuzari is simply extending that idea and saying only those who are descendants of Shem, Eva, and Avram can become Nevi'im. So that aspect maybe is a little less well known, and there's aspects of that make the Western era uncomfortable. There's no doubt about that.
On the subject.
So again, I don't want to go too much into current affairs, other than for those who follow a lot of the debates raging within the Dati Nomi world around the Kav Yeshivas and the secular movement and the followers of Tzvi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Zobin, Cohen Cook. There's debate around how far to take these ideas, and to those who follow it, there's aspects of it that I think to many people ring very, very nationalistic beyond what we're always comfortable with in how it's communicated. Again, if you're aware of it, you're aware. I mean, my purpose now is not to talk about Dati Nomi world at the moment. I just want to reference it since it's become a talking point in the Kuzari. Yeah. Yes. Until they mix within the broader population. Yes, descendants of Gerim also until they mix within the broader population. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I just want to speak briefly about Eretz Yisrael. And by now, what I'm going to say about Eretz Yisrael won't be too much of a surprise to anyone. The same thing in Eretz Yisrael. It's uniquely equipped. It's not a coincidence. It's the perfect environment for us to develop spirituality. It contains all the correct geographical features, resources, spiritual features for us to become that. It doesn't mean it doesn't need nurturing. It doesn't mean you can automatically rest on your laurels just by being in Eretz Yisrael that you'll be a spiritual person, but it has the potential to offer that. The analogy is, if you have just the right sort of terrain in France to grow wine, it doesn't mean it will grow wine. It can be full of thorns. You have to plant grapes there, number one. You shouldn't plant anything else there. And these need to be cultivated and labored on in order to develop into the best quality wine. But if you do all of that, this region can produce the best quality wine and somewhere else can't. As hard as you try, Newcastle will never be a center of the grape growing industry. It just simply won't happen. Geography molds nations. You have a seafaring folk who are going to be very different to a landlocked country's national identity. You have people that live in a peaceful part of the world who won't develop the same warrior culture as those who live in tougher parts of the world. Geography molds nature, and the geography of Eretz Yisrael is uniquely equipped to mold the nature of Eretz Yisrael. The king then turns to the Kuzari, and I'll just summarize this in very brief, and says, if this is all true, you Jews aren't living up to your potential while you're all in the diaspora. And the Kuzari, the Chacham replies, it's tough to go to Eretz Yisrael. Again, it's tough today. It's tough 1,000 years ago. It's dangerous, but you're right. We should be there. And the conclusion of the Kuzari, and with this we'll finish the series, an amazing conclusion. The conclusion of the Kuzari is not the conversion of the king. The king, that's earlier in the story. The conclusion of the Kuzari is, the Chacham says to the king, I've got to go now because I've decided to make Aliyah. And I'm moving to Eretz Yisrael. An amazing conclusion to the book, and people miss this. This is literally, you can find the Kuzari, by the way, online in Sefaria in English also. And literally the conclusion of the book is, he says, I now need to go. And the king says, why? And he says, because I've got so much more I can do in Eretz Yisrael, so many more mitzvahs. And the Kuzari king says to the Chacham, I thought that you wanted freedom. I found out your religion is tough enough as it is. Do you really want to go to Eretz Yisrael where it's going to get even tougher and you'll have even more mitzvahs and more obligations? And the Kuzari finishes, you've misunderstood the nature of freedom. Freedom is where you can be yourself, and I can only be myself fully when I'm there. Bye-bye, and off he goes to Eretz Yisrael. And that is literally the close of the Kuzari. Okay, to conclude, we spent several weeks looking at the amazing, remarkable life and works of Rabbi HaLevi. In this show, I've tried to bring the parts of him together and to demonstrate that the same Rabbi HaLevi who writes poetry, secular poetry and spiritual poetry, is Rabbi HaLevi who wrote the Kuzari book, is Rabbi HaLevi who moved to Eretz Yisrael at the end of his life, is Rabbi HaLevi who so desperately tried to restore Lashon HaKodesh into a living language that could express beautiful ideas and poetical ideas. And probably, I would argue, more than any other thinker, molded what we consider default Yiddishkeit, default Judaism, in so many ways, to such a degree that his work is almost unlearned now. And when you give a shiur, if you want to be interesting and snappy and snazzy, you say the Rambam, because that's the sort of controversial view. But that's because of the influence of the Kuzari, his work, and because perhaps it reflected more what Jews felt was Judaism also. I'm not saying he was just the former of that, the one who formed it, maybe the one that reflected that also, but certainly amongst the most influential Jewish works ever written, and a work that remains challenging and with aspects of controversy to this day. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this series on the Kuzari. We're now taking a break for the summer. I'm open for nominations for our next great Jewish thinker should be for after the summer. Wish everyone a good morning.
Yeah.